All right, welcome back. So today we're looking at the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This is one of my favorite parts to talk about in American history for a couple of reasons. You'll see why by the end of the week for sure. So, looking at this map right here. So, we talked about the Plymouth Colony last week. The Plymouth Colony being, again, right in the bay right here, the Nantucket Sound. We talked about how, again, this is the Mayflower. This is where the Mayflower landed in the Plymouth Colony. This is the people that we refer to as the Pilgrims. They're also known as separatists because they are separating from the Church of England. They're actually separating from England itself. And also they are known as Puritans. And it is specifically, the Puritans that we're going to be talking about today. Puritans, again, where does that word come from? They wanted to purify. That's right. They wanted to purify the Church of England. So when you hear the word purify, and when that comes to religion, and especially when it comes to wanting to purify something about a specific religion, usually that is cause for some caution, I guess, cause for caution. This has been a I guess maybe like a buzzword for potential warfare within religions and even like genocide in certain cases. So like the goal of purity and saying that they want to purify the church, essentially what they mean by that, and this is why I want to be a little bit more specific when I talk about the Puritans and what their actual goal is. Their goal is to get the church away from like a outlying governmental body. And instead, like the church, the congregation of the church is that governing body. So, we talk about the separation of church and state, and, we talk about that as that being, again, you have like a government that is completely independent of the church, and church completely independent of government. And there's both pros and cons to both approach. Like, only looking at like one as being correct and another as being incorrect, is a box that we can't just put everything into. There has been some times in history where the church and government have coexisted, and it has been a time of tranquility and peace. And there have also been times where it's a time of disaster and warfare. That's been the case also for countries that have this divide of church and government. So we can't 100% say that one's better than the other. They have strengths and weaknesses. The Puritans, we are going to see some of those strengths and weaknesses, which is important for us as to why and how America is molded as the country that it is, especially when we look in terms of the Constitution. The Constitution is the governing body, essentially, of America. It is the governing document. It is what we refer to. Everything in terms of government it cannot, if it's unconstitutional, it cannot be. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been unconstitutional acts, unconstitutional bills, unconstitutional, compromises, treaties, agreements. That's not to say there hasn't been, but through time, again, if something is unconstitutional, we must go back and correct that, because that is our standing as a country. So, Massachusetts Bay Colony. Last thing I want to say before we move any further, this is what is going to essentially turn into Massachusetts. As you see, it embodies the cities of Boston being the capital of Massachusetts, and one of the biggest cities, not just today, but definitely in early America, or early, 13 colonies, early United States history. And we have the city of Salem. This is where it's going to get fun. We're talking about Salem. We'll talk about that a little bit later on this week. I had a dream last night that I'll save it. I'll save it when we get to Salem. All right. So a little bit of background. Let me move my face a little bit. Okay. So 1630, We have the second group of people arrive in Plymouth. We've talked about those Plymouth colonists first and foremost, arriving in the year 1620 on the Mayflower Compact. We talked about that. It is in this 10-year period in which the Plymouth colony is now, is thriving. So more Puritans are coming to Plymouth from England. The Puritans are led by John Winthrop. John Winthrop, we're going to see his name pop up again here just a little shortly. He is also the topic or the subject of our assignment for today. The Puritans, they came over to Plymouth in about the year 1630, more and more, and to about somewhere around 20,000 people in total in the Plymouth colony. This would then later expand into the Massachusetts colony. So while these Puritans are coming to Plymouth, again, they are starting to expand, and they are essentially what created the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, the way that this worked in the Massachusetts Bay Colony is that the governmental leaders had to be chosen by the people, but they also had to be formally admitted by the Puritan Church. So how this would work is that they would have to have their beliefs examined by high authority positions in the church, like in order to become a governmental leader. Now, today, by contrast, there is no like religious test. Like, you don't have to be of a certain religion to be president. That's not to say that people will not. That's the how I want to phrase that. There's never been any type of religious test. There also has never been anyone in office that has like completely denied having like religious beliefs, religious connections to different churches. Some people think that's just kind of like old thinking. Some people just believe that is like traditional thinking. Some people, even some people think that the reason there's never been like a so-called atheist president is because it would just be like bad PR. So who knows? Who knows? But that has never been something that has been asked of governmental leaders in America. Now, in terms of like senators and reps, then we're talking a little bit different in terms of like their religious background. But in terms of president, every president has had some type of like Christian background, or at least they've claimed to. And again, you can look at, you can explore different reasons as to why that may be the way that it is. But that fact does still remain. So what this does between the governmental leaders and the church is that it creates a strong connection because, again, the authorities in the church are appointing the authorities in the government. This does lead to a sense of potential nepotism, not just like friends and family, but also like friends or just people that can help these churches out. Think about it this way. So if you were appointing someone that had the power to, grant you more funding, grant you more leniency when it comes to like taxes or anything like that, like, why wouldn't you want to appoint them, or why wouldn't you approve of their appointment? One reason would be ethically speaking, but if you can kind of bend the rules of ethics a little bit, then that's where people start, again, like letting things happen. They're just kind of, taking a blind eye to it, and just kind of ignoring, small indiscrepancies. So the Puritans, they settle near Salem and Boston, Massachusetts. Again, this is what creates the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They do have issues with the natives early on, what we call the Pico War and King Philip's War. We see the years that correspond with those, 1936, 1938, or 1636 to 1638 and 1675 and 76. There are issues with the natives until peace treaties are signed to end both of those wars. And the conflict then becomes more internal instead of external. I think this is an important part. I added this in for a reason. This wasn't in the slideshow that I did last time I did this presentation. One of the reasons I added that in is because this is, I guess, if you want to look at like political theory, And that's one of the things I'm interested in, not necessarily like in the political parties, but like in the thinking that goes behind like political theory in of itself. That again, that's what my degree is in political science. And one of the interesting things about politics and just how people behave and interact with each other when they have opposing views is that if there's nothing to keep a civilization, a country, a group of people unified, if there's nothing to keep them unified, they will split. They will divide. It is biology. It is that is how life works. We see this in biology at the cellular level, at the molecular level, but this happens on like that. That's the microcosm of this macrocosm that we're living in. So politics is just it reflects that. If there's nothing to keep some to people unified, they will split. And so when there is a common enemy, there's a saying: the friend, no, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Uh, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I'm going to say that one more time. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You can hate each other, but if you hate the same person, then there is a bond there. There is a bond. There's something that keeps you two together. And we've seen this throughout American history. When there has been external conflict, when we've been fighting against another country, we've been able to get over some of the stuff, the individual differences that we have here, in terms of like the citizens of America. Like we've been able to get over and surpass those, problems that we're having. Again, like there's always been a split politically speaking. There's people on both sides. Like that's essentially like one of the one of the something that continues through extended amounts of time. Like there's been presidential elections where one candidate has won like an overwhelming majority, and there's been Senate elections, again, representative elections where that's been the case. But there's always been a pretty even split as to the different political parties and different political beliefs, different religious beliefs in American history. So, but again, as Americans, we have a lot in common. We have a lot in common. And it takes sometimes an external enemy to show us what we have in common. Last 22nd, 11 days ago was September 11th. That was probably the biggest unifying cause in my lifetime. It was the year after an election, after a very controversial election in which the Supreme Court essentially was kind of helped, was actually like brought into the election as to whether one of the candidates could continue. Nobody really knew exactly who the president was going to be until like a month, after the election actually took place. So there's a lot of controversy. Democrats, Republicans at each other's throat. But then in September of 2001, what happened? Well, there was a terrorist attack that killed 3,000 people in New York alone. And what did that do? Well, it didn't make Democrats and Republicans or poor and rich or black and white. It didn't make them fight. Instead, it brought them together. That was the most unifying year. I'll definitely say like for that next year, everywhere you went, there was American flags flying. Like people were just like, everybody was on the same side. Like everybody knew they were on the same side. And like that was pretty beautiful. It really was. Now, it's not to say there were still what individual differences, still not to say there was bickering back and forth, but at the end of the day, everybody knew it's like, all right, we're on the same side. We are against this. And when you don't have that, again, that division becomes a little bit easier. All right. So the Puritans. Let's talk about the Puritans and some of their beliefs. Puritans are an interesting group of people. For some reason, I shouldn't say for some reason, I kind of know the reason, but over time, people look at the Puritans just being like completely prude. I don't think that's the case. I think they're just part of their time. So the Puritans, who are they? They're a religious group. They're a Christian group, a religious group that believed God was just in every action on earth. When we say just, we mean justified. We mean justifiable. We mean good. We mean right. We mean that God is never going to do anything that is not necessarily, we're not saying necessarily bad. Like there may be something bad that happens, but in the end, it will be for a just reason. That's what we're talking about. And that is what the Puritans believe. They believe good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. That may seem like, oh, that's kind of silly, but people still believe this today. Like that's what people believe in karma. This is what they believe in. Good things happen to good people. If you do good things will happen. If you do bad things will happen. Bad things happen to bad people. So this is essentially not just a belief of God being just, it's belief in karma, and we see that transcend different religions. Like you don't even have to be religious to believe in karma. What goes around comes around. This is essentially what the Puritans were talking about. But they believed that God would punish you accordingly. So if you were sick, it is because your sin, you have sinned, you have done something wrong, and God is punishing you. On the flip side of that, if something good happens to you, if you have a good harvest, if you have a lot of crops, bountiful crops, you're making money and you're well fed, this is due to your obedience to God. So you're doing good things for God, and God is rewarding you. This can be problematic thinking. We'll say that because not. I guess it's tough to tell 100%, but sometimes, it seems if things just happen, and we can't really decide if it's good or bad in the moment. Like, what if you get sick and you can't go to a concert, but at that concert there's like a pile up, like due to traffic, and maybe it was something as small as, well, you didn't get in that fender bender and you didn't have to, pay somebody's insurance to help get their car fixed, saved a couple $100s, or it could be something like much worse. Like, again, talking about 9/11 a couple minutes ago, like, people, for odd, like mysterious reasons, like they missed their flight. And that's like a bad thing. Like, oh, I got to get home. But they missed their flight and their life was saved in the process. So we can't always tell what's good and what's bad in the moment. Very rarely, I believe, can we actually do that. It's only in retrospect. So being sick could be a good thing. Having a good harvest could be a bad thing. And this is actually we actually see that in the Bible itself a lot. But again, the Puritans are biblical in their beliefs, just different interpretations. So what else? They create a theological government. Again, theological. We talk about theology. We're talking about religion. So they create essentially a religious government. So again, governmental leaders had to have their religious beliefs examined to ensure that the leaders were strong Puritans with fundamental Puritan beliefs. Again, this is one of the downsides, one of the cons of having a civilization that is purely based on religion. Is there's not much room for latitude. There's not much room for free thinking, independent thinking, more collective. That's not to say that the beliefs are in of themselves wrong. That's not to say that at all. It's just to say that there's a lack of questioning that maybe goes on, and that can lead to, again, just times of conformity or times of just like lack of progress, because things are constantly moving. Like things are always in movement. Everything, you can never step in the same river twice. That's an old quote. We're talking about probably 200. I'm talking about like 2,000, 2,500 years ago. You cannot step in the same river twice, Heraclitus, because things are always changing. Lastly, for the Puritans, let's look at the governor of Massachusetts. His name was John Winthrop. And again, strong Christian or strong Puritan. Strong Puritan, again, he gives a sermon that he titles City on a Hill. Now, this city on a hill is not just something that would be referred to by the Puritans. This has been referred to by like politicians, like modern politicians, as that we, America, should be that city on a hill. And this goes back to some of the early, we can't really call them Americans, but we can call them influencers of America. John Winthrop gave a sermon titled City on a Hill as a guide for how the colony should present itself and how it should behave. Now, this in of itself is based on a Bible verse from, excuse me, this is based on a Bible verse from Matthew 5:14. It says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden." Now, why is this verse important to the Puritans? Well, they believe that they are the city on the hill. They are the city that is closest to God. They are most like God. They most emulate God. They are obedient to God. And because they are that, they are what everyone else is looking up to be. So they do look at themselves as being, I guess, having higher favor with God, but that also comes with more responsibility to lead others to God and to also be a good witness and to be a good example for other cities, other people, other groups on earth. So it does not come like easy, and it's not just, we are the chosen people and that it doesn't matter what we do. No, there's a lot of responsibility that went with this, which is why they lived their lives the way they did. So what was colony life like? And whenever we're talking about life and how people lived, especially before the advent of like air conditioning and indoor heating, I think that's the best place to start, is the climate, because your physical surroundings influence your really your emotional and can influence your spiritual surroundings. Cold and snowy climate that resulted in long winters. Again, this is in Massachusetts. Check when it's starting to get a little colder now. Check Massachusetts in 2 months and see what it looks like compared to here. Short, mild summers. It does get warm from time to time, but it doesn't get like it's not like the 95 and humid that we typically get around here. And if it does, it's for short amounts of time. Like we had our last 90-degree day was, I think, like it was right around Labor Day, so about two and a half weeks ago. Hopefully that's the last one. I don't know the last 90-degree day in Massachusetts. I hadn't been checking. Got to watch more Weather Channel. The rocky soil. So again, this is talking about like physical environment. The rocky soil that rocky soil that hindered the ability to plant crops and to harvest. So how do you think they got most of their food? Waiting. Hunting, fishing. That a lot of that is part. Well, I should say hunting, fishing, and then like grain. Like so, grain can kind of grow on grain and corn kind of grow anywhere, but it's not like this. This isn't the South where you have like long growing seasons. Like there are shorter growing seasons because of the longer winters. Marriage was an important part of the Puritan colony life. Marriage was encouraged. Many were wed young. Sex was only to be confined to marriage. There were strict penalties for those for adulterers and those that had sex outside of marriage. And this is because, again, biblical principles were used to create moral codes of law. So we could also say the same about like drunkenness. Now, while the Puritans were not completely like abstinent in drinking alcohol, like drunkenness was a crime. And we're going to look at some of like their rules, some of their punishments. It's interesting to see like how they lived their life the way they did. It can be kind of reminiscent of, excuse me. It could be kind of reminiscent on like Hammurabi's Code in a sense, as that there is like strict punishments for strict crimes. It also helps lay down the foundation for what's going to become the Eighth Amendment of the United States that bars cruel and unusual punishment from being used on prisoners. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on this week. Y'all get ready for that. I'm excited. Man, I wish we was in school because we'd have a movie to watch. It's all right. The husband in the household was responsible for financial needs of the family, whether this be shipbuilding, whether this be fishing, whether this be like building houses. There were farms. Not to say, even though they're not going to be as maybe productive as like a southern farm, there's still farms in the area. And the wife was responsible for the welfare of children, and not just their own children, but the children of the community. The Puritan life was very communal in that people lived very much amongst each other, and that it was the job of the adults to make sure that children were like kept in line, and that didn't have to be like your own parents. Like you go to the store now, and you see like one adult telling like a kid that's not there is like, hey, you need to, you don't need to be touching that. You don't need to be messing with that. And then you got some mama coming up saying, hey, don't you talk to my kid that way. You wouldn't get that. You wouldn't get that in the Massachusetts Bay Colony with the Puritans. You wouldn't get that in a lot of places. Get that today though. Golly, if I would have been acting up in the store and another adult would saw me and got on to me, my mom and dad would have got on to me too. That happened so many times. Anytime my teacher called, and this happened a couple of times. Anytime my teacher called, like, dude, I was done. I was punished for months. I wouldn't say months, but I was punished for weeks, definitely. Like, just because an adult was saying that I wasn't doing my job, wasn't pulling it, wasn't doing good, doing stuff I shouldn't be doing. Like, that was enough. Things change sometimes. Education. Speaking of teachers, education was prioritized for children so that they could learn to read. Specifically, we're talking about how they could read the Bible. Now, the reading that you guys are doing today of John Winthrop, this is the type of writing that would be done by Englishmen at the time. This is why if you read the King James Bible, you're actually reading essentially what the Puritans were reading. The King James Bible was introduced, I want to say 1601. I may be off by a couple years here or there, but it was King James the First. Again, King James, that's who Jamestown was named after. So they want to convert the natives to Christianity. Again, the Puritans are coming over with the Word of God. This is all the King James Version of the Bible. So if you read the King James Version of the Bible, you're actually seeing kind of that same language that the Puritans used to use. Now, even today, there's a lot of churches that do not use the King James Bible anymore just because it's not the way that people talk anymore. It's not the way that we communicate or communicate effectively. So that is why you see different versions of the Bible that aren't the King James Version. But it is the King James Version that was first, I guess, introduced to this continent. Like, that was the first Bible that natives would have seen. It was the first Bible that colonists were bringing along. That's just a little bit of history for you. Lastly, the church was the center of each town, again, as the church was the most important part of colony life. And let's go to our last one. So this is just some facts about the Puritans, just some kind of stuff, just to kind of let you know a little bit about them, and some of the misinterpretations. So one of the things is that people think that, like, especially here shortly. So by the end of the week, you may be thinking, man, these Puritans are dumb. But they weren't. They were actually really big in education. They actually founded Harvard. Harvard is because of the Puritans. We would not have Harvard without the Puritans. It was founded in 1636, and this is the most prestigious school in America or in the United States. Women were very important, even though they were not financially responsible for the family. They were, again, incredibly important to the welfare of the children, which is essentially the welfare of the colony. They ran the households. They were teachers. They again did a lot of, like, I guess we say ran households. Did a lot of like the housework, but this is more than just like cooking and cleaning. Like, this is essentially like operating the household in terms of like teaching their own children, teaching other children, making sure that children are like in church, making sure that colony life is flowing and operating while men are working. Obviously, we live in very different times today, but it does not diminish the role that women had, even though they did not necessarily weren't the money maker, I guess, of their family. Church services were long. This is something that I imagine you probably were already thinking. Church services were long, 2 to 4 hours. Yeah. I mean, this is kind of what you would expect, right? By really like devout religious group. The church services were long, 2 to 4 hours. Again, this is why it was also the center of the town, is because it'd be accessible to everyone. They did not celebrate Christmas. That's something that we just assume, like if they're Christian, then they'll celebrate Christmas. They did not. They believed that Christmas had its roots based in paganism. There is. You can do the research here if you want to, because this is not only a debated topic in Christianity, it's a debated topic in paganism, it's a debated topic. It's just a debated topic. So if you want to look more into that, you're more than welcome to. Puritans, I also put they like to drink. Drink alcohol is what I'm talking about. Now, why did I add that? Well, I add this because, again, because they are a religious group, people assume that they are extremely dry. I guess figuratively and literally speaking. But there's just a lot of misinterpretations about misnomers about the Puritans. They weren't, they weren't like prudes. Like, yeah, they believed in God. They were religious, and they practiced what they preached. But it's not like, sometimes people get the idea that like you can't be, you have to be like, you have to fit into this box. And I guess that's been like my biggest thing with American history, is like, you learn, the more that I've learned, the more I've learned that I can't fit anybody into these like nice, easily categorized boxes. Like, everyone's a lot more complicated than that. And that's one of the misnomers about the Puritans, is that they don't drink alcohol, they don't like music, they don't like theater, they don't like art. That's not true. It's not. Like, you go back and look, and you find evidence of that. So, yeah, that's just something I wanted to put in there to kind of get rid of some of the misnomers, and get rid of some of just the what do you want to call it, the academic laziness we get in. And that's to me too. Like, sometimes it's easier just to, okay, well, if they believe this, then they also must have acted like this. But that's not always the case. All right. So we're going to continue to talk about the Puritans. So today, knock out today's assignment. Again, it's just kind of like just some close reading, closed reading, and some fill in the blank stuff, just to kind of get you just reading and more in tune and more familiar with the way that the Puritans wrote and the language that they used. All right. Thank you, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.